Good morning, everyone. My name is Adrienne Ackerley, and I'm going to be your host today. We do have quite a large group attending today's webinar, so to help us avoid any unnecessary background noise, may I ask, if you've not already done so, please enter your audio pin that you will find on the right side of your screen. You simply press the pound sign, then the number listed, and then the pound sign again directly into your phone. Or you can simply hit the mute button on your phone. Welcome to today's webinar. This webinar is geared to take approximately 40 minutes, as we know that your time is valuable. Once we have completed, we will open it up to a short Q&A section, so please hold your questions until then, or you can simply type them in on the right side of your screen and we will address them after the presentation. Mark and I will stay on as long as necessary, so please, any questions, enter them into that chat box. Mark Stillman is a co-founder of Energy Engine, as well as president of Energy Edge Advisory Group, a management consulting firm which provides a broad range of services to participants in the downstream energy space. Mark is a student of the energy industry who continually studies the changing dynamics of this exciting marketplace to help position dealers and technology vendors for the future. Mark has a broad professional background with specialties in strategic planning, finance, product hedging, and executive management. Through these webinars, we all hope to shed a fresh perspective on the emerging challenges facing our industry, stimulate a meaningful dialogue, and sometimes even challenge the conventional thinking of our attendees. Mark, it's all yours.
Okay, Adrienne, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a large group, and I'm going to try to stick to our timeline. I really appreciate everybody joining. There's a really diverse group on the phone as well. There's a lot of small independents, there's some really large marketers, there's other vendors and technology players in the space. So again, thank you all. It means a lot to us that you show up and take the time. A couple of quick things before I jump into this, and we have the provocative little screen here talking about the emergence of e-commerce and what it's done to the retail environment and how the fuel industry is not any different and not immune to these forces. But before I jump in, I do want to make a pretty interesting point, and maybe this is a little bit of group participation if you could help me out a little bit. So we do approximately 8 to 10 webinars a year. I speak an awful lot to industry groups. My partner John does speaking as well. And a trend that we've noticed is that whenever we mention will call or COD, we had a webinar once titled The End of Will Call. Whenever we push that button, a whole ton of people show up, either in a room or today, which is, I believe, our record attendance, and that's not in any way bragging. That's just the fact that we have put a bunch of people on this call today. So to be perfectly frank, although I like to think I'm a pretty astute observer of the industry, I'm not quite sure what button we're pushing when we talk about this. I'm going to take a run at it today, and hopefully I hit some of the expectations of why this group showed up and why this topic is important. But if you don't mind, at some point, you can chat into the GoToMeeting screen here. You can send me an email directly, which my email is on the screen, and let us know. We're curious as to why this topic creates a lot of interest. Part of that reason is because John Vrabel, my partner and founder and CEO of Energy Engine, and Adrienne have been in the e-commerce fuel space for over 15 years. And I doubt anyone without self-promoting knows more about e-commerce and COD and will call and online fuel sales than John Vrabel. So we live in the world of will call and COD. That really is the best application, at least in heating oil, for e-commerce and online fuel sales. And we have a lot of data, and so we are authorities on this. We have a lot of information. I will share some of that today. What I'm going to share with you today is not theoretical. We have a very large customer base who has hundreds of thousands of heating oil and propane customers on the other end of their business. And we do a really good job of tracking metrics and the behaviors of this part of the industry. So but we live in a bubble, right? Like you guys do. So we're curious to know what it is about this topic that gets people interested. And we will then in the future make sure that our content aligns with what you're looking for. It's definitely a challenging part of the market. It has definitely been a headache in the past. I worked on the operations side. When I first came into this industry, I was not born and raised, but in the mid-90s when Hop spun out of Dreyfus, I was early in that company. I know what the will call and COD market was and how difficult it can be. So we will cover some stuff today. One thing I do want everyone to know out of the gate so you don't drop off thinking this is some giant Mark Stillman sales pitch. Other than the word engine on the slides, I'm not going to talk about the energy engine specifically today. I'm going to talk about e-commerce, changing trends in the industry, what good e-commerce products do, why they're different than portals. But this is not a sales pitch. I'm also not making pontifications that I know better and that this is some educational. I'm just trying to share ideas and share information and open up a dialogue with you folks in the industry at large. So we will progress here through. It's interactive. We like to have questions at the end just because time is of the essence. But if you're really keen to get an answer or you want to argue and debate, then shoot a chat in and Adrian can interrupt me. So I put this slide up just because it's interesting that we all get desensitized to how much the world has changed in a decade. My daughter is 13 years old, which comes with its own set of challenges, but it's amazing her perspective on the world versus mine. She doesn't know anything but post-smartphone. So within the last decade, I mean, the world has been turned on its head, right? So, but in 2007, Facebook was actually competing with MySpace, which I always find comical. Amazon obviously had a bookstore with a pretty crappy coffee shop in it. The first iPhone was released. That was really the dimensional shift in our world, right? That was 2007. That is stunning. It feels to me like I can't imagine a world without a smartphone. We went to the store, we went to the mall. We didn't know what e-commerce was, right? We knew what mail order was, but we didn't really know what e-commerce was. And it's really shocking how that has impacted every industry, including ours. And sometimes people lose the perspective on that. I was in Indianapolis this week, this last couple of days with my business partner, John, and we were presenting this to a technology partner of ours who's based in Indy. And I was given this presentation, and then, this is always a compelling slide, but yesterday morning at the airport at 4:30 a.m., which I'm not sure how that happened, but my boss seems to like to put me there. He looked at me and said, I can't believe it. It's only been 10 years. Now, this is a guy, John Vrabel, who's been in the e-commerce space for 18 years. And even he is shocked at what has happened in this world. So what has it done to our industry? I think it's done to our industry what it's done to every industry. Any type of retail, any type of service business that touches consumers, is it has created a customer we don't know. In the heating oil and propane space for generations, and I mean generations, I was just at an energy summit where some of the companies that were there were from pre-Civil War. That's where their roots went in some of your colleagues, and that's a long time, right? It was pretty easy. There was a very loyal, full-service, automatic customer. Price was not a big sensitivity for a very, very long time. And we knew that customer very well. And on the other side of that, there was this will call customer. And then on the other side of that was the COD customer. And each one of them wanted a sort of very specific relationship with you. But this digital revolution, as I call it, really has, consumerization has created a whole new breed, right? The fuel business is dealing with an entirely different customer. They're not really comfortable in two buckets anymore. The automatic bucket and the will call bucket are great, and they work for us, and it's all we know in a lot of ways, but new consumers want a variety of levels of service. They want to decide, and if they don't see what they like, they'll make their own category, and that's kind of what's happened here. They also expect to be engaged online, and I don't use quotes very often. It's only because I want to draw out the distinction of what engagement means versus communicating. Just because you're communicating with a customer in any business doesn't mean that you're engaging them. They're different, and we'll go through that a little bit. And our fuel customers now are, their habits, their expectations are not just being shaped by your competitors. They're being shaped really mainly by other industries. Their experiences at Amazon, their experiences with Uber, their experiences with LL Bean, that's all being drawn in, and then their fuel patronage to you turns into just something else that they buy. So if you look at all of this, sort of the digital revolution is creating their own categories, self-determination, wanting to be in control, having lofty expectations from you, maybe even on the borderline of being unrealistic, wanting to be engaged a lot, and having these sort of benchmarks with other retail experiences, that's really driving up an increase in will call and COD. And I want to quickly and very powerfully state that we are not promoters of will call and COD. We build a tool to help you deal with that challenge, like a lot of tech vendors do for a lot of different reasons. But we're not advocates of this. We're just sort of realists that this is happening, that this new consumer that's sort of emerged in the last decade really aligns with the will call and COD business model. It gives them more options. It gives them more control. So there's an interesting component to that we all should think about. That we didn't cause this because people don't like full service. I believe that that's mythology. I think what consumers don't like is having two choices. So given just two choices, they'll choose the most flexible option. And the data is loose, but not as loose as you would think. If you look at the total heating oil demand, I'm going to make that distinction today because there's a lot of propane folks on the phone, and we will talk about that. The total heating oil demand was about 80% automatic just before the turn of the millennium. But now in some markets, it's 50-50. Total heating oil demand is half will call and half automatic. That's a really big increase. And that's not every market, and that's not your customer base. But if you look at total demand, that's kind of how it's shaking out. So it's an age-old debate. I like this slide. It makes me laugh, and I'm probably the only one. But my young daughter I lifted this slide out of an old PowerPoint that I had, and she used to be in charge of my artwork when she was 8 or 9 years old. And I would just simply tell her what I was thinking and what I was trying to convey, and she would find some cute little emoji, if you will. So we're talking about the age-old debate of automatic versus will call, the value judgment of automatic versus will call, and she chose the happy love fest, and then the poor person hitting himself in the head with a hammer, which probably is really more indicative of what will call means. But this is a long-standing debate in our industry, and because of what's happening in the industry now, because of the increase in this will call and COD space, there's more and more people hitting themselves in the head with a hammer. But there's also more people, I believe, who are realizing that there's actually a lot of gallons there. There's a lot of growth opportunity there, but it's a real pain in the butt to go do it. And we're not quite sure what it means to our brand. So I think a great place to start is to take a breath for a second and take your opinions of will call and COD and set them aside and try to deal with what's happening today and the facts as we know them. And the fact that will call and COD are really forever changed. They're not the same thing they were 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. They're not this low value pain in the ass that your grandfathers and dads and grandmoms and mothers hated. It's a really different world now. And we have to stop value judging will call and COD and start to address the realities of who they are. First and foremost, internet shopping made low-end relationships cool. So will call and COD to consumers, a certain segment of consumers, they're fine with a low-end relationship. If you look at sort of broad research on e-commerce and Amazon and Nordstrom and anybody else, consumers like a low-end relationship. They like a better price. They like to decide their service level, and there's something cool about this sort of disconnected relationship. So Amazon made low-end relationships cool. The demographics are forever astoundingly changed. Demographics of will call and COD, I don't need to tell you guys and girls what that means, right? It's some overbearing, controlling senior citizen who doesn't trust you, who puts a magic marker stripe on his fuel gauge and calls you when he's down to half of a tank and tells you it's an eighth of a tank. Or It's people who have a 420 FICO score, or it's somebody who needs 50 gallons and is standing there at the gate with an angry dog when your driver shows up, or maybe they're not even there when he shows up. So that really has sort of been the segment in our minds, but that's not true anymore. Please, this is the one thing that we all need to sort of accept, is that will call and COD, just like online shoppers looking for a deal, are everyone: school teachers, policemen, executives, doctors, lawyers, everybody. And I think that's an important distinction here. I am a full service propane customer in central New Hampshire. That's where I live. And we've already had a lot of degree days, so my propane guy is probably happy. I have a service contract, I'm an automatic, I give them my credit card, and that's, even though I'm in the e-commerce business, that's the world I live in. My neighbors are both retired pediatricians from Boston, and money and credit scores are not their issue, but they have made a sport out of online shopping for their propane. It is unbelievable that they are a will call and COD customer, but I think that's indicative of the world we live in. It's not just certain segments and certain profiles anymore. I think bottom line, there's far too many of these people to ignore. It was easy to ignore the will call and COD space when there was 10 or 20% of the demand, but at half the demand, and if you look at Metro Boston and some of those areas, there's pockets where will call is 60% of demand. You can't ignore them anymore. Some good news, though, is that they're immensely loyal, and this surprises everyone we talk to, and this, quite frankly, surprises John Vrabel, my partner and founder of this company, who I thought has seen every data point in the history of e-commerce. Loyalty rates for will call and COD in the engine. Now, don't forget now, hundreds of thousands of customers on the other end of this e-commerce solution, lots of deliveries being made, lots of data being captured. There's a loyalty rate of 75%. Now, full service customers, depending on who you talk to at Nora or look at some of the research from Warm Thoughts and those folks, 85% or so is about the loyalty rate. And loyalty rate is, are they customers of yours year over year? And the second part of that calculation is their average purchase through will call and COD a high percentage of what their sort of average annual usage would be, meaning are they buying most of their gallons from you? So at 75% in our customer base with hundreds of thousands of data points to deal with, it's pretty high, shockingly high. It's really close, within 10% of the average full service customer who we know has become less loyal, who we know will drop you for a nickel, who we know costs $600 to get and God knows how much to lose to your competitor. So this market now has become loyal. And so all this sort of points to the fact that this is a hybrid. This is not a will call and COD customer anymore. This is something that really we call affectionately on demand. They're just choosing a different way to buy their fuel from you. But, and believe me when I tell you, I have worked on the operations side, I have worked on the hedging side. These customers are disruptive and they are margin killers. They're on the phone. We saw it last winter more than ever. They blow it up. They're unpredictable. The fulfillment costs are high. The average drops are low. If you're extending credit to some of these will call customers, that could be a problem. If you're waiting for checks at the gate, that can be a problem. The inefficiencies that are driven in the will call and COD market are bona fide margin killers. Nobody's going to disagree or debate that. So that really is the problem. So if we enter the rest of this sort of presentation this morning talking about the solution, the problem is digital revolution, new consumer has sort of tilted more of them towards will call and COD, which, by the way, is the biggest pain in the rear end that we face in this industry. So that alignment is odd. It's sort of playing to our weakness, and I say our because I consider myself part of this community. Will call and COD are not really we want people to land, but they're landing there. So how do we fix the problem? How do we make them less disruptive? And how do we have them stop killing margins? Well, so far, the industry has done a good job, right? Let's just call it like it is. And all of you have tried things to sort of minimize the impact of this consumer. Portals are certainly the most notable thing. So 24/7 self-service. They can, customers can make orders there. It's a really great step in the right direction. There's some incredibly good folks in this industry building really good portals. And that's fine, but that really is good for existing customers. It's not good for this sort of transient e-commerce customer, because it basically takes them on an automated journey for some stuff, but creates a lot of still of same manual processes in the background. And it's not really capable of engaging and communicating with an e-commerce customer and a will call on-demand customer that they want to be. But it is really smart, and everybody should have one. If you don't, you need to go out and buy one. And that's not an endorsement of portals. It's just that you got to be there. Tank monitors are another thing. And there's lots of great tank monitor companies out there. And quite frankly, there's a whole bunch of them entering the space. But that's a great way to take the guesswork out, right? That takes a will call customer and adds some level of control for you. It definitely creates stickiness. So both of these solutions are really good first steps for phase one of dealing with a changing consumer behavior. The other thing is you're all really great at running your businesses. So there's delivery processes, there's minimum delivery times, there's, we've moved away, I hope, from the drop everything for a will call customer and pulling drivers off their routes. So from a business process perspective, I'd hope that you've built some rules around that part of your business. So a lot of good stuff has already happened. But what e-commerce does, and what we try to convey to the dealer community, is that all of these solutions that have been thrown at this problem to date really help you internally. They help you manage the chaos and disruption of this part of the market. They don't really help the consumer, though. They're not engaging, they're not interactive, they're not really allowing people to participate, they're not sort of what I call manners marketing with lots of thank yous and lots of suggestive selling and, thanks for visiting the site and here's a coupon kind of thing. That stuff isn't happening to engage the customer. So e-commerce does, though. It takes it all the way. It allows you to take what you've done on the back end of your business to deal with will call and COD, and then takes a front end approach, which what does this consumer want? What is the best way to deal with this consumer? How do we engage them? Right? We know that there's meaningful growth. We know that you all could grow your businesses with will call gallons, and yet it's a step that people are anxious to make, and I totally understand that. But with e-commerce, it's an innovative way to do it. We've tried to grow the will call gallons and COD business in the past. I've been part of some of those projects. And you can't keep using the same tool over and over expecting a different result. There needs to be an innovative approach. We have to attract and service these customers in a fully automated way. When they blow up your CSR phones and people are waiting at gates for payment, that is not the way to do business. It's way too much friction and way too expensive. E-commerce builds digital relationships. That's a weird sounding robotic statement, but consumers expect a relationship. Just because they're online doesn't mean they don't have really high expectations that there's a relationship. It might be virtual, but it's a relationship. And above all, it reduces fulfillment costs. We know that e-commerce, look at all the e-commerce companies out there. What is their big thing for profits, right? It's the huge reduction in fulfillment costs when you take all of the front end phone work out of the equation. You take all of the expense of having a brick and mortar store out of the equation, and you become a logistics company. E-commerce does the same for fuel dealers. It really drives down your fulfillment costs. And it's a customer experience tool, which is a really overused term, but we do live in a world where experience matters. I was just making this presentation in Indy the other day and telling the folks in the room that it used to be people were sensitive about price, and then it became they were sensitive about time/convenience. And now, if you look at research, it's really neither of those. It's about the experience. An example would be that Amazon has killed the mall business, but weirdly, it's reinvigorating downtown small America businesses because consumers like that anachronistic experience again. Even though it's more expensive, So one of the weird sort of whiplash effects of Amazon is it's revitalizing a lot of downtown shopping. It's happening here in New Hampshire all over the place. So e-commerce, let's talk about this real quick for 20 minutes or so, talk about the sort of features, what separates it, why you need to think about it, why it's good for the will call market. We like to view e-commerce as a 360 customer coverage wheel. I also like to view it as a rare example of a revenue generating technology. I sat in your chair every day. There's somebody coming into your office with a new technology that's supposed to drive cost out of your business. Very few people come into your office with technology that says, hey, we can make more money and help you grow. It's an interesting dynamic in this industry, but as somebody once famously said, you can't save your way to profitability. You have to grow. You have to be pushing revenue and profits. So e-commerce is a tool solely designed to grow with the added benefit of cutting costs. So it's new customers, it's retaining and servicing customers, building loyalty, and it's engaging inactive customers. This is an interesting thing. We've watched people explode out of the gate with their e-commerce business because they had a roster of 8,000 people in a database that were inactive. I've been in your offices. Some of the inactive customer lists are gigantic. And we have seen people use e-commerce to take that list and build a business around it. So the focus has to be on the customer. So what does the customer want in e-commerce, and how is some of that different from some of the tools that you're using today, most notably portals and shopping carts, which, by the way, both are good. We're just trying to draw a little distinction here because we have a lot of conversations with dealers who really don't understand, not because you're not smart people, it's a complex topic, the difference between a portal and e-commerce. So customer registration, one-time login, this is important. Consumers hate going back and logging in more than one time. When you don't remember them, they get offended, right? So online pricing is important. Getting your price out there is important, but online pricing and e-commerce is really best when you make them put in some information to get that price quote, capture that email address, the ability to put that in a background database, remarket, retarget to them either immediately or sometime later. So pricing is important, but it's also a really good data capture tool. If a portal or a shopping cart doesn't have a database in the background to capture this stuff, then it becomes really manual and hard for you, which has been some of the issues with these automated customer-facing technologies. You've got to be able to sell fuel. You got to be able to have upsells. You've got to have a checkout that's really fun and suggestive and able to drive higher margin stuff. A lot of our clients sell additives and various things at checkout. Really important. Suggestive selling, margin drivers. It's hard to make margin in fuel sometimes. And then email and text confirmations of what they just did. Online payments is obviously important. E-commerce has to be able to make sure that you're paid before your truck leaves that yard. So everything is handled here, all kinds of e-payment methods, whether that's credit cards, debit cards, you can even do checks and ACH. There's various things to do, but the bottom line is it has to be automated. You can't create a whole bunch of manual credit card entries for you guys, and you have to get paid before you leave. Email and text alerts, it's so weird. This feels like a really cool new thing, but it's so 10 minutes ago at this point. If I don't get a text alert or an email from somebody I do business with about something happening, something I ordered, I'm like I'm pissed off. I'm like, what? How do you guys not send me something, right? So that has to be in there. And then delivery completions. Again, full financial reconciliation. What happened? How much did I pay? Here it is. It landed on my smartphone. I'm doing it on the run on the way to the grocery store. And you're satisfying sort of two things for me. You gave me a great experience. You gave me an ability to shape my relationship with you. And you communicated with me and interacted with me, so I don't need to pick up the phone and call you. So from a customer perspective, it's all about what Google calls low friction. The more friction you remove from a process, the happier customers can be. Order management is really just, how do these folks manage their orders online without your sort of participation? it's really strange in our industry. You know, we are all, me included, so used to the delivery order and then delivery execution process to be really sort of intuitive. A lot of thinking happens around it, right? Automatic is pretty easy, but dispatching is hard. Will call customers really don't know how to assess when they need fuel, what it means to you. So we focus a lot on order management functions. So a couple of those things that are really interesting are scheduled delivery e-notifications is what we call automatic e-commerce. So the system knows a customer, knows when they ordered last, and in the heat of battle in the winter, if that customer hasn't ordered in 20 or 25 days, it will automatically send them a reminder, you're probably due for fuel, kind of thing. That's done by text and email. That's a pretty slick feature. A lot of our customers do gain a lot of orders through this sort of automatic, sort of poor man's automatic delivery. First, delivery inspection alerts. I know folks in certain states, certainly Massachusetts, have rules and regulations, and some folks, just as a matter of good practice, want to inspect the tank before they go stick fuel in somebody's basement. A good e-commerce system, I almost said our system, I almost let you down there. A good e-commerce system should be able to alert the customer of these sort of special rules and conditions that you might have in your business and explain why they exist. Not just you need a tank inspection, because what that's going to do, they're going to pick up the telephone. So we need to stop them from picking up the telephone. Automated credit card processing, that's a duh moment. The automated credits, though, is important. One of the issues with some online ordering systems is the customer orders 200 gallons at a certain price, and then they get 150 gallons. So not only did they get less than they paid for, they actually paid a different price. The price for 150 gallons is higher than the price for 200 gallons. A good e-commerce system should be able to do all that reconciliation in an automated way, not some poor CSR sitting there trying to figure out how to match off the math. Security, obviously the world we live in, if you're not PCI compliant and you're in the e-commerce business, then you need to get out of the e-commerce business. I can't tell you how much time we spend with our hosting vendor, because we are a cloud-based company, managing all the changes in security. They have a huge team. That's all they do 24 hours a day. So on screen, on the fly price changes, that just means as the market's moving, you're moving your price. We live in a world now, I make the joke, when I first went to HOP in '96, I think we moved our price like 6 times in an entire season. And now there are dealers out there living in a world where volatility is causing them to change their price 6 times a week, 3 times a day. And if you don't have a way to make that on the fly, then you're putting your margin at risk. So that's built into a good e-commerce system. Customer logs in 1 minute, it's $2.99. If the price goes up, they log in 29 seconds later, it's higher or lower. The last piece here was really kind of what I call the magic. So a lot of what was just covered seems pretty natural and logical, but it's important stuff. Automated marketing, or what we call automated relationships, is really the fork in the road. If you look at the difference between e-commerce and then a portal or shopping cart solution, it's its ability to engage a consumer in an automated relationship, as if it was a virtual extension of you and your team, as if you were talking to them and saying all the right things, but it's not being done in a way that has to be attended. So the real goal is to acquire, nurture, and build these relationships with the right tool. So behavioral targeting, number one. Any of you people out there who are in the audience who are online e-commerce experts, because I've run into a whole bunch of you who know a heck of a lot about it. Behavioral targeting is the hallmark, excuse me, of e-commerce. And that is when you go to a website and shop or look or do research, whether it's a car, whether it's a lollipop, whether it's a pair of shoes, excuse me, I need a drink of water there. That behavior is being tracked. And in the background, some communication by email or text is going to go to you, either thanking you, suggesting to you, giving you a coupon, maybe even asking you why you didn't buy. Maybe it's a net promoter score thing, whatever happens, right? And that automation of behaviors and then outbound communications is really important. It's also the hardest part of a system to build if you're in the e-commerce software business. How do you track that? How do you determine where to trigger something? And then how many behaviors are there? Are there 40? Are there 100? Are there 10? This is really important. If you talk to any e-commerce client, if you were to talk to any of our clients, they would tell you, this is the piece that gives the most bang for the buck. If a customer comes to your site in the most elemental way, gets a price quote, and doesn't order, the engine will go back out. I just did it again, see? An e-commerce system will go back out there. I can't keep my promises this morning. We'll go back out there and look for that business. Hey, you got a price quote. If you order in the next 5 days, we'll give you a nickel off. So that stuff, going back out, looking for lost, if you will, opportunity. Referral programs that are fully automated. We believe in giving credits to the referrer and referee. There's a Facebook share there for referral programs. Again, fully automated. Referral programs are great. You know that they're great. We've tried it sort of the old-fashioned way in the industry for a long time with mailers and different things, and never really have been that great, but the referral rates in e-commerce are extraordinarily high. It's shocking to us sometimes. Affinity programs are aligning yourselves with nonprofits or charities that you like, community groups, the local hospital, and making them the consumers aware that you are moving some of this revenue into that organization. There's a lot of altruism in the world, and people do like when you're aligned in an affinity, but doing that manually is massively hard. Social media linking, we know what that means. We know how important that is. E-list gold, this is really, again, part of the magic here. Good e-commerce systems entice the consumer. Don't force, it's a different word. Incentivize and entice the consumer to give up their email address. And consumers are fine doing it if they're enticed to get something meaningful. And these lists can become enormous. We have customers with 15, 20, 25,000 email addresses. And when they send out a can't order campaign for fuel orders or will call, they'll get a 10, 20% response rate. And if you're sending that to 20,000 people, that's an enormous amount of orders. So the magic is in capturing these email addresses. I think the industry average is somewhere around 15% of the customers that you have email addresses for. I'm hoping that number is much higher now in today's day and age, but it can be hard to get those email addresses. The last thing about good e-commerce is you have to have a managed content functionality. I see too many people out there with websites, and I say this with as much peace and love as I can muster, that you have to call somebody to make content changes. That's just not the world we live in anymore. Web content should be dynamic, changing, fresh, timely, talking about current events, changing your story, changing your prices, changing your value messaging. You should be able to manage the content on the fly by yourself. My daughter can manage the content on my company website easily, probably better than I can. So that's an important part of e-commerce. This is where, and I'll take a quick breath here. So all of what I just talked about is really, really powerful stuff, and I would encourage you to chat with us or somebody else more about that. And it applies equally to heating oil and propane. But there's enough propane companies on the phone today that I really want to take a couple of minutes here, and then I'll wrap it up, to talk about e-commerce and why it's different in propane. If anybody in propane doesn't know why online ordering is different in propane, then maybe you want to consider a different career. But it is different, right? There's a lot of safety stuff concerned. There's company-owned assets involved. So how can e-commerce possibly work for propane? Well, it does. And we've had a propane module since the energy engine was founded in 2009. And we have a lot of hybrid fuel dealers, oil and propane in the Northeast, who use that propane feature, and more are using it. And John and I went to NPGA. We've both been there a lot, but this is the first time we ever went for e-commerce in our business this past year. talked to a ton of people, talked to a ton of other participants. We probably had more interest from other software companies and consulting companies than we did dealers who still kind of scratch their head a little bit. But a lot of folks in propane get it. A couple of places you can apply e-commerce and propane. And again, this is not theoretical. This is happening. We watch it happen every day. There's a lot of will-call customers in propane. There's a duh moment for anybody who's out of the heat market on the phone. And moving them online, just incentivizing them to stop picking up the telephone is an important way to drive down costs and give them a better experience. There's all kinds of great ways to use price tiers. There's lots of delivery conditions. You can load a lot of cool information and sort of text bubbles into an e-commerce system to talk with propane customer through the will call process. So that's certainly one area. Customer-owned tanks. This is an interesting and often polarizing topic, but don't shoot the messenger. I didn't create this. This is an example where consumers are creating their own category. I don't want you to own my tank. I want to own my own tank. You don't get to have that control anymore, right? So whether they're right or wrong, it's happening. And what we're seeing is in some markets, that's 20 or 30%. We just talked to one of the larger MLPs in the industry, and they've made a couple of recent acquisitions that are 100% customer owned. And these are not trivial businesses. These are 10,000 account customers, 12,000 account companies that they're buying, 100% customer owned. Shockingly, one of those was in Massachusetts. That blew my mind. 6,000 customer-owned tanks in Massachusetts. So this is growing. I'm not sure how PERC feels about it. I'm not sure how you guys feel about it, but like everything else in the world today, the consumer's doing it anyway. This is absolutely best served online. Walk them through the safety procedures, walk them through the gas check issues and pricing, and then service this part of the market if they want to have their own tank. Consider doing it online. Also an important thing, as this segment seems to want to keep growing. The third one here is really intriguing to me. Having done acquisitions in my career and then trying to build out businesses, acquisitions are really expensive if you haven't noticed. And a lot of times it's hard to make that money back if you haven't noticed, especially now. So lead generation with e-commerce in propane is really cool. Drive the internet, not your car. You can test market new areas. Just take the e-commerce tool, which is all geo-located. So a good e-commerce tool will only allow search results in the zip code where you're servicing. It's kind of cool. People don't always know that. Somebody from Iowa can't go online looking for discount propane and hit a customer in Vermont. A dealer in Vermont. So you can test market areas. We see people do this all the time. You can also develop full service leads this way. You use e-commerce and an e-commerce website to push out into geographies, and people go on and they are interested in your business. It's a lead generation tool. Really, really important. For those of you in propane, I always think of the old AmeriGas model as you give some guy a truck in a one-room office in the middle of nowhere and say, when you get 1 million gallons of fuel, we'll give you a CSR. And, that's just a really hard way to do business. So this is a great way to do an acquisition sort of by proxy, push it out there with e-commerce. We're also seeing people use it for point of sale for appliances. It can be a lot of work to load in all the information of the appliances that you sell, but in certain parts of the country, appliance revenue, it can rival fuel revenue. So we've seen people sort of take a run at the big box stores using e-commerce in the propane space. We know the application is different. We get it. We can help you understand what those differences are, but it's really important. Propane is not going to escape sort of the changes in this e-commerce consumer. So what has it done to wrap it up? Well, will call and COD is a thing, as my daughter would say. And it's important that we address it. And I know that a lot of you out there scratch your heads and say, I just want to be in the full service business. It's just easier. I don't want to deal with these price shoppers. But I don't know if it's possible for us forever to continue to make that decision, given the number of these folks out there. If you do it, here's what we know. by data, by proof, that e-commerce customers using a really good e-commerce tool that was just described, not a shopping cart, feel engaged and they're happy. The net promoter scores are very, very high. The convenience scores are very, very high. The growth is pretty incredible. For us, and I'm going to use our data because it's the only data point I have, easily growing their businesses by 500 new customers a year, their online businesses. In some cases, the overachievers are putting 1,000 new customers. And if you think about the loyalty of that, we talked about these aren't always one-hit wonders. Yes, some of them are, but a lot of them stick around because the experience is good. Gallons growth by extension is greater than 30% year to year. That wasn't last year. We're not going to fudge these numbers because last year would have been a bad year to make that metric. That since 2009 when we took on customer one. Orders will obviously grow. We know that the fulfillment costs are lower. This is an important thing for you operation geeks out there like me who like to crunch numbers. If you look at what the cost per contact of a will call customer, calling in, running down the hall to the dispatcher, trying to fit it in, trying to figure out on the route, trying to get a driver there, go out there, it's a small drop. How did you acquire that customer? How did they find you anyway? If you look at doing that online in an automated way, directly, the whole journey from the minute they got exposed to your brand to the minute that they paid you, it's about 11 or 12 cents a gallon less than the traditional model of engagement for will call and COD. We know that will call and COD can be a low margin business. It's just part of the game. And we know a lot of you are out there in these aggregation, oil.com, casheatingoil.com. Those are okay, but let's just accept that that's a race to the bottom. We don't want you in that business. I understand that that's a way to get gallons and it's easy because the orders just come in. But at 18 cents a gallon that I see in certain markets, 20 cents a gallon, I don't know. I'm sorry, I can't justify rolling a truck for that. Do it yourself, own the customer, drive your own costs down, manage your own margins, have the equity of that customer, smarter way to do business. Don't race to the bottom for will call and COD. Simply isn't worth it, and it's not necessary. And then profitability. Right, every delivery is profitable. Our average drop size in e-commerce is 195 gallons. If my partner's on the phone, he might tell me that I'm 3 gallons off because he's a stickler. But our average drop size, in some cases, we have customers who have an average drop size of 200. It's about customer training. It's about a really good tool reminding them to make sure that they need fuel and making those deliveries as profitable as possible. Again, there's margin pressure because there's price pressure. So average drop size matter, low fulfillment costs matter. So new consumer, pumping up the will call COD rosters, still a pain in the butt. They've always been a pain in the butt. E-commerce really is the answer. Or what we like to say now, on demand. So with that, I think I've taken up my 40 minutes. And people have questions. There's a couple of questions I've seen here, but Adrian, if you want to fire them off, I will do that. If anybody would like to know more, I'll send out a thank you note. There'll be a recording of this webinar that if you want to share it, and if you want to burn it, if you want to call me up and argue, because that will call COD tends to spur a lot of emotion, please feel free to reach out, and we'll great to have a conversation. So Adrian, anything there? If not, I have a couple.
Yes, Mark. First, let me say you did a great job. Very informative. There are a few questions. The first one, you were saying you can build a relationship with someone online. I don't get it. How can that be done?
Well, I think that every online retailer is proving that that can happen. And that is, from the moment that they hit your site, we're tracking behaviors, we're triggering emails and text messages. There's a manners marketing, which is thanking them for visiting, asking questions, prompting them to do things. When they're ordering, there's a confirmation. Think about how you build a relationship in your traditional full service business. You're not talking to every one of those customers. They're calling into CSRs now and then, right? But for the most part, it's statements, it's things in the mail, it's mailers, it's promotions. It's no different, it's just that it's an automated way. Amazon is a great example, and we like to draw parallels there because we love shopping in Amazon. It's convenient, it's easy, they communicate, they understand, they know you, they're prompting you at all the right times. In e-commerce fuel, it's the concept of reminding me I might need fuel. So a relationship that is digital is simply having a dialogue in a virtual forum, using email and text versus the CSR. And in some ways, it's easier to communicate your brand through digital channels. Otherwise, with all due respect, if you leave your brand story up to CSRs in your office who are buried every day on the telephone, that's probably not the right person to deliver the message. And I can certainly argue that drivers and service technicians are not always the best people to deliver your brand. This is an interesting industry, right? You have these powerful legacy brands built on sometimes a century of hard work. And the people who are touching the customers most are not always the most well prepared to do that. Digital relationships and communications can be more effective.
Okay, good. Doing everything you're talking about sounds incredibly complex. How many people do I need to hire to do all of this?
None. It's an interesting thing about e-commerce is so you build a site, and that's one of the questions I just saw come in because somehow I'm getting questions too, which never happens directly. Is where does this website live? Is it attached to our existing site? Is it a new site? It's a spun up. It's a different site. So think of it as a business startup, right? We've all talked about diversification in this industry. We tried everything from pool water to HVAC to steakhouses. Diversification is hard. Fuel dealers are really, really good at fuel and service, and diversification has proved challenging. So this is, to me, I always view this as a diversification strategy. If you're in the full service automatic business, there's a ton of will call business, start an online fuel business. It's a different service level. They don't get everything that you have. They get fuel, if that's all you want to do. And you build a new site. It's a different company name, maybe. Maybe it's abcoilonline.com versus ABC Oil. Maybe you make up a different name. But it's just integrated with your business in as much as that site is doing its job in producing orders, handling everything else but the delivery of that fuel. So therefore, it doesn't need any additional resources. In fact, you could argue it's taking away resources. For those of you on the phone, because I saw some of the names on the roster who are already in the COD business, lots of folks are in, or they're doing more COD and will call than they are automatic. And in some cases, like New Jersey, that's just a fact of life in some places. That's just how it works. And this is the perfect tool. You could probably do it with less people. We have a customer who will remain nameless that does probably somewhere around 4 to 5 million gallons of heating oil through an e-commerce solution. And they have like 2 people in the office. They don't need anybody in the office. The phone never rings. They'll say to me, Mark, my phone never rings. So you need to hire less people. Here's where you need people, though, is that e-commerce and online marketing is not something that is free. You don't put up a URL on a great website and expect the world. It's not Field of Dreams, as John Vrabel says. They just build it and they will come. You need marketing resources. You either have your own, you can bring them in, you can go find them. You need to invest marketing. It's a business startup. Traffic to your site isn't just going to show up. So using good SEO, using good pay-per-click perhaps, Google AdWords, is all different tools that you can use, Facebook, to drive traffic to your site. That is where you will need to invest. There is no need to invest in people. Part of that story is that we have now built integrations between our system, I'm not going to speak for everybody else, between our system and Cargus and Blue Cow and working with Ad and a couple others. So that now it's fully automated. Now nobody touches anything. So you don't need to hire anybody. The only thing you need to do is maybe hire another driver and get a truck, because sometimes these online businesses can get really big. But that's a good problem to have.
Okay, next question is, I have a propane company and have a lot of customers who call for their deliveries. So would love to move them online. But in propane, we have tank issues we need to understand and so many different size tanks. How can e-commerce handle it all?
Well, I guess I'm a little unclear on the meaning of that question. Maybe that person could reach out to me. In terms of tank issues, you should know the size. Maybe I'm a little confused on the question. So you have to know the size of the tank of your customers, unless you are going there for the first time, in which case you're going to have to do all the gas checks. So the fact you should know the size of all of your customers' tanks in the field. And then the engine, well, an e-commerce system would know that. Our database is set up as a mirror image in real time of your back office database. So whatever's in there for your customers' equipment, tank size, any, what regulators and different things, it's all also in the engine. So when that customer orders, you should have a good feel for what it is. And if you don't, and they're brand new, then you're going to have to go out there and do a gas check and inspection anyway. So then your driver will know. But I admit to not knowing the exact intent of that question. So whoever that is, feel free to reach out to me and I'll go through it.
Okay, Mark, one of the things I can add to that, just in case it helps with the question, is at least in the engine, and I apologize for using that as an example, but it is set up to run as we always say, your business, your rules. So we would actually enter into the database all the different tank sizes. However, there may be some companies, some propane companies, who do not wish to sell to the smaller tanks. So we just would, set that expectation. Remember, you want to set expectation and not list those tanks, or say that, we only deliver, say, 500 gallons or more. Whatever the rule is, we base it on that. So just in case that helps with the question. The next question is, I heard you mention all the automated marketing. I get it for heating oil, but does it also work for propane?
Yeah, because really all we're talking about there is if you have an e-commerce fuel business, and that's really what I call it. If you have an e-commerce fuel business, you have a website that's purpose-built for e-commerce fuel. Then when customers find you and go there and they visit, they're like the rest of us. They pop around the site. They do different things. They click on the newsletter. They click on a price quote. They click on About Us. About Us is the most visited page on an e-commerce fuel company's website. As they do those things in the background, if they get that trigger, that will trigger an automated email to them and a text alert. Now, there's a couple of ways to do that. Some people can trace an IP. Some people want the customer to enter the email address first. Most people in the fuel industry don't want what they call follow me marketing, where they're tracing IPs. But if you get the customer's email address, because an e-commerce solution is always prompting for that email address. You shouldn't let a customer do anything fun or valuable or learn anything fun or valuable without having to give up something. If any of you on the phone are in sales, there's this whole give and get theory, which is too many salespeople out there give too much and they don't ask for anything back. In e-commerce, we're asking for something back. We're asking you to give up your email address, and then that's your gateway. That's the currency for participating. If you want to be in control and you want to interact and you want to engage with us, that's great. But you got to let us know who you are, right? We need something too. So those behaviors can trigger emails or text, depending on what the customer wants. That's part of that relationship. That's part of that relationship. So that's just part of that relationship building. It's interesting that if you look at, again, research about e-commerce across the board, e-commerce customers tend to feel that their company they're doing business with knows them better than the brick and mortar company did, because you're tracking their behavior. A lot of times you don't know what your customers are doing. In the traditional model, if that's a will call customer especially, you don't know what is going on. But at least with e-commerce, you're able to track what they're doing. It also is a great, just real quick, I didn't mention this, it's a great strategy for those of you in really price-sensitive COD havens, like in Fairfield County, Connecticut, outside of Boston, pockets of Pennsylvania, Maine. Oh my God, Maine. You know, you're in these really hardcore COD race to the bottom markets. Your full service customers can be under a little pressure and tempted to go there. Rather, you know, if you're going to lose them, you might as well lose them to yourself. Which sounds like a weird thing to say, but it happens all too often that in these really high price sensitivity markets, that there's a lot of full service attrition to will call. That doesn't happen everywhere. Full service customers tend to be different animals than COD. I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and go buy cheap propane somewhere. It's just not how my makeup is. But in some markets, the delta is so big that pressure is there, and your e-commerce business becomes a bit of a safety net.
Okay, looks like the last question is maybe in addition to the propane question we weren't sure about.
Yep.
We have to make sure our propane customers actually own their propane tank before we can deliver. How can e-commerce handle that? We can't deliver to another company's tank.
Adrian, you probably know this better than I do, but don't we make a sign an ownership certificate, right? Something like that?
Well, sure. During the registration process, one of the things we ask is, you know, we ask about tank. Is it customer owned? Is it that it's owned by another company? Or is it that you are looking to get a new tank? So at least with the engine, we find that out. Now, if it's a customer owned tank, you can't proceed any further until that certificate of ownership is uploaded, faxed, emailed, however the client wants to get that. Until that is received and the company then releases the ability to order. If it is, they want a new tank or it's owned by someone else, this is a lead for you. You can go out and then sell it as you wish, whether you want to create them or, you know, convert them to automatic or a full service customer, or whether you just want to sell them their own tank and let them be a will call customer. So those two are leads for you. The customer owned tank are the only ones you can deliver to. However, the certificate of ownership has to be received first.
And let me add to that. And again, this is not some sort of slick way to get people to jump on a demo, but our propane module is pretty complex and it answers a lot of these questions. The journey the customer takes to order propane in e-commerce is a different journey than a heating oil customer takes. We get it. We've obsessed about that process. We put alerts in all the right places. We put the right documentation in place around who owns that asset. The interesting thing is, could a customer lie? Yeah, sure they could. But here's what we do also. We work, John especially, works with all the major insurers in this industry. I'm not going to name them, but you know who they are, all of them. And we're constantly taking our documentation around tank ownership and tank health, heating oil and propane. When the customer signs off on that, that's a pretty powerful document. The insurance companies are all fine with that. The customer assumes that liability. So we're very careful, certainly in propane, that all of our documentation is vetted by the insurers in the industry. We do it regularly. But again, you'd have to see the module. That's why when I do these webinars with propane customers or dealers on the phone, I'm careful to draw distinctions. You kind of have to see the process. We certainly don't have time. I'm already running at the hour mark here, but trust that us and I'm sure others understand the nuances of that space.
Okay, so that was the last question, Mark. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. And Mark, you mentioned you're going to be sending out a thank you email. So if anybody has any questions, they can certainly reply to that.
All right, thanks. Have a great rest of the week, everybody.